Welcome to my science tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be talking about naming of aldehydes and ketones. Aldehydes and ketones. Now, we know that the functional groups aldehydes and ketones are described as carbonyls. Carbonyls. This is a combination of aldehydes and ketones, and they are signified with a functional group having a carbon doubly bonded to the oxygen atom. Doubly bonded to the oxygen atom. That is the functional group known as carbonyls. Alright, so determining whether the carbonyl group is an aldehyde or ketone is fairly simple. We have the carbon, which is doubly bonded to the oxygen, and then we have an alkyl group here, and over here when we have a hydrogen there, then we can be sure that this is an aldehyde. What if we have a carbon doubly bonded to the oxygen and we have two alkyl groups here, then we can say that this is a ketone. Alright, another thing we have to know is that this carbonyl compound is it is a polar functional group in the sense that we have this carbon which is doubly bonded to the oxygen. The oxygen is partially negative, and the carbon is partially positive, and we all know why. The oxygen is more electronegative than the carbon, and I also have some lone pairs there, and so there is going to be polar. And when that happens, we can say that the carbon is electrophilic, and our oxygen is going to be, oops, did I just say the carbon is electrophilic? Sorry, let's get that off. Alright, so our oxygen will be electrophilic and our carbon will be nucleophilic. Okay, there are more interesting characteristics that we can look at when we're talking about carbonyls, but today we want to look at how we're going to name aldehydes and ketones. So let's clean the board. We are good to go. Alright, so let's start with aldehydes. So we are looking at the IUPAC nomenclature of aldehydes. Alright, I did mention that when we have an R bonded to a carbon and a hydrogen doubly bonded to oxygen, then we know that this is an aldehyde. So when we condense it, we just write CHO. That is an aldehyde. And I did mention that the R is an alkyl group. Alright, so how do we name aldehydes? Naming aldehyde is quite simple. It's just like we are naming alkanes. Now, what is the difference? One thing we have to take note of is anytime we are naming alkane, the terminal E, then put it in quotes, the terminal E is replaced by al. For example, when we have alkane, which is, let's say, methane, this is methane. What will be the corresponding aldehyde? For an aldehyde, we'll say that it has, let's always remember there's a double bond O attached to the carbon, and then we also have a hydrogen here. So now it is triply bonded, so it's with one thing, which is such the hydrogen. So in this place we have the E at the end of the alkane. Now what about the aldehyde? This is going to be methanol. Okay, So you notice that the E has just disappeared, and then we have Al, A-L over here instead of the E. That is simple. Let's look at another example. If we have this as an alkane, then we'll say that this is salt. This is a propane. Let's have a blue E. Propane. What if we have this? It is no longer going to be propane. Just remember that we are counting the longest chain. So in this case, because we have a functional group aldehyde there, which is a carbonyl, we're going to count these to be our 1, our 2, our 3, just as we counting the propane. So instead of propane, we're going to have propanol. Alright, so what is the difference? In this case, we have the E making it propane, but over here we have the Al, which is making it propanol. Good. Let's look at another example. Over here we have let's put this here. So how are you going to name this aldehyde? Don't worry, you can just pause the video and try it out. Okay, now let's continue. What we have to do first is what count the longest chain from the functional group. So when we are counting the longest chain from the functional group, then we can say this is our 1, our 2, 3, 4, and 5. So how do we name this? Initially we know that it is what, if it should be a methane, it's going to be if it is an alkane, it's going to be pentane. So we can be sure that the corresponding aldehyde is going to be pentanol. Alright, but remember we have some other alkyl groups attached to it, and we have to write that according to the alphabet. So when we are counting, we can see that over here we have an ethyl group attached to the carbon number 2, and we also have a methyl group attached to carbon number 4. Because just like we name alkanes, we have to write that in alphabetical order. So the name is going to be 2-ethyl, 4-methyl, and then the longest chain, what is that? Pentanol. There is an N, please. Now, what if we have 2 of the aldehydes functional groups present? So let me just see. 2 of aldehyde functional groups present. So let's look at this example. And then over here to see double bond O, and then we have a hydrogen. So how do we name this? Now when we have 2 aldehyde groups present, we don't have to bother ourselves indicating the number for the aldehyde groups, because we know that they are going to be at the terminals as usual. So if we have something like this, then we know that it is dial. So let me just put it dial, which simply means 2 aldehyde groups present. So we still count the longest chain over here. So it's going to be our carbon number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the corresponding alkane name is going to be hexane. So naming this is going to be 1,6. We have a dash hexane dial. saying dial. Alright, why don't you try another one? Let's look at this. We have you can pause the video and try this out. Alright, so remember I said we always have the aldehyde functional group at the two terminals. So in this case we have carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our corresponding alkene is going to be pentane, which means it's going to be pentanal, but we know that we have two aldehyde functional groups there, so it's going to be dial. Alright, so on carbon number 2 we have an ethyl group. So how do we name this? It's going to be 2-ethyl. So we have our 2-ethyl, and then our functional groups are on carbons 1 and 5. So we'll continue and say 1,5 pentane. Let's bring it down. Pentane dial. Alright, so one thing we have to take note of is that anytime we have any other compound where the compound has a functional group that is of a higher order than the aldehyde, then the aldehyde is going to be referred to as formal. Prefix formal. Alright, so this is the end of the video. Watch out for the next tutorial where we name ketones, and then we look at the prioritizing these functional groups and naming them. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe and share this link to your friends.